It's good to see you all here at this session about supporting employees during the summer holidays. This, of course, is a very good topic to have, and especially considering today, for a lot of people, it's the Thursday of the summer holidays when it comes to children from school. So if you have kids in the living room kind of playing around, I certainly do, very welcome. And hopefully this session will be very helpful to you as well. A few things we're going to cover today. We're going to look at, there's a quick recap on entitlements, what is actually that people are entitled to in terms of annual leave, how to handle requests effectively, how to support working parents. We're going to look at supporting employees in a heat wave and what to do if employees are stuck abroad because of strikes or technical issues or volcanoes that prevent airplanes from flying. There will be a Q&A in the end, and there's a Q&A section available for you to ask any questions you might want to ask, and we'll make sure we answer all those questions at the very end. There's a quick one. We are delivering the session as part of our social impact fund. So Root HR, we are an organisation that works with the social sector and charity sector, and we always want to make sure that people management is absolutely top notch within our sector. And so what we do is part of our profits, we are making money available to deliver these kind of webinars, newsletters, blog posts, free resources such as fact sheets and toolkits that you can download for free from our website. No strings attached at all. And we also offer a free hour advice, which I'll cover towards the end, that you can use if you're not a client of ours already. So with that being said, we're going to have a quick recap on what people are actually entitled to when it comes to annual leave. So in the UK, employees are entitled to 5.6 weeks annual leave, which equates to about 28 days. Well, it equates to 28 days annual leave for someone who works 5 days a week. Now, the pay for the first 4 weeks should be based on normal weekly pay, which includes regular overtime, bonuses, and commissions. So if someone receives regular overtime or they receive bonuses or commissions, which is not very common in our sector, but it does happen sometimes, and that's a regular payment, then when they go on annual leave for those first 4 weeks, they should receive that as part of their weekly pay as well. The remaining 1.6 weeks are paid at the basic weekly pay, and that's just their annual salary divided by 52 to come to the weekly pay. Now, again, a lot of organizations will use that 1.6 weeks to cover bank holidays because it works out to be exactly 8 days. And of course, in England and Wales, we have 8 bank holidays where in a year where there's no coronation or something else that's really big. So 8 bank holidays is the kind of standard, and that's what we normally use to cover those days. Now, bank holidays are not a statutory entitlement, so if people have to work bank holidays, that's absolutely fine. And that's why actually we're saying you're entitled to 5.6 weeks rather than 4 weeks, because that's the total entitlement you're entitled to within UK as an employee. Now, if you offer more than statutory, so more than 5.6 weeks or more than 28 days, then make sure to prorate that to part-time employees according to the hours that they work or according to the days that they work, because if you pay part-time employees less or give them less entitlement than a full-time employee, especially where they're rounding hours, then that can have a big impact because they could make a legal claim for detrimental treatment because they are a part-time employee. So always make sure you kind of work out exactly what they're entitled to based on the hours that they work. And if it's kind of same hours but on the same day on days, but they just work less than 5 days, so let's say they work 3 days, then it's quite easy because you can do it in percentages. So 4 days is 0.8, 3 days is 0.6, 2 days is 0.4, 1 day is 0.2 of the full-time entitlement. If they work kind of different hours and different days, then you might have to do it based on hours, and so then you have to work out what how many hours someone gets in annual leave, and then prorate that to the hour for those part-time employees as well. Always, if you struggle with kind of calculating annual leave, we have a calculator that you can use to kind of calculate part-time entitlements. And the second standard is 25 days plus bank holidays, so 33 days in total. So that's 5 days in addition to what the statutory entitlement is. That's what we see kind of when we work with our clients, when we are reviewing their benefits, but also kind of standard reports coming out every time. It shows that 25 days is kind of what the usual standard is within the social and charity sector. Now, when calculating part-time leave, I should say that as well, you always take into account bank holidays, because of course that can be also quite complicated to work out if you're part-time, because you might not work on Mondays or Fridays where most bank holidays fall. So always when you calculate part-time annual leave pro rata, make sure you include the bank holiday entitlement if you normally give bank holidays off. So rather than saying we're going to calculate pro rata on 25 days, do the pro rata on 33 days, and then work out bank holidays if they need to take that time off. Now, in 2024, the UK government changed the way we can calculate annual leave for irregular hour workers. Irregular hour workers are people who are term time only, who are 0-hour workers, casual workers, or even agency workers, where there is no either fixed amount of hours that they work each week, so it can change every time week to week, and maybe some weeks they don't work at all, or it might be term time workers where they are working a set amount of weeks within the year that's less than someone who works a full year. Now, that was in reaction to a Supreme Court ruling back in 2023, where a term time worker brought her employer to the tribunals and eventually to the Supreme Court because she believed she was entitled to 5.6 weeks annual leave, even though she worked less than a full year worker. And she won the case, which then had some consequences because it was extended to 0-hour and casual workers as well, which meant that essentially someone who was working 2 weeks a year, if they remained employed or engaged with their employer for the whole year, they would be entitled to 5.6 weeks leave, which of course was very disproportionate and made no sense whatsoever. And so in 2024, the government actually fixed that by amending the legislation. And what they now say is that essentially someone who is part year or irregular hours are now entitled to still 5.6 weeks, but they are entitled to a pro rata element calculated at 12.07% of the actual hours worked or the actual weeks worked for a term time worker. And so you can really proportion out the amount of annual leave that someone gets based on the number of hours or weeks that they work. Now, another thing that was introduced as part of that is that we can now pay rolled up holiday pay, which is very helpful if you have casual or 0-hour workers where people work different hours each week and you have to work out what their actual annual leave entitlement is. And we can use that rolled up holiday pay to essentially pay an additional amount each month or each week, whatever your pay period is, that essentially covers the annual leave entitlement. And again, that's based on 12.07% of actual money earned within that pay period. And I've got a quick calculation that you can see here. Of course, you can kind of pause it, or you can take a screenshot of this to work out how to make this calculation. It's based on HMRC's example. So the example says Hannah works regular hours and is paid weekly. Her hourly rate is £12.21 per hour for all shifts. And in the week of the 1st of October to the 7th of October, Hannah worked 35 hours. So to work out how much rolled up holiday pay Hannah's entitled to, we need to calculate 12.07% of Hannah's total pay within this pay period. So the way we look at it is we look at the amount of hours they worked times the actual hour rates. We get to a number that says 427.35. We can then divide it by 100, which gets us to £4.27. We multiply that by 12.07, which is the proportionate element that essentially equates to 5.6 weeks for a full-time employee. We get to £51.58.11, and then we round it up to the nearest pence. You can round it down as well, but I always think from a rounding perspective, it's better to go up because it creates less confusion or upsetness by those employees who are receiving it. So we get to £51.50 now, which he receives in addition to the £427.35 as annual leave payment. You can get there faster. You could also do £427.35 times 0.1207, and you get to the same amount as you'll see on the screen. But this is how HMRC recommends you calculate it for payroll purposes. And then that line will show separately on their pay slip. So what they will get paid is £427.35 and £51.59, which is then the holiday payment. And that then covers you when it comes to your compliance with the annual leave payments for that employee or worker. So that's what we do with irregular workers. Again, of course, you can still apply the 5.6 weeks methodology, but that very likely would take things out of proportion if they work less hours each week, or they don't work in every week for that matter. Right, that is holiday pay out of the way. What about dealing with requests then? So in the UK, again, what we always recommend is you deal with requests promptly. The worst thing you can do is sit on someone's request and then wait a week or 2 weeks to respond to that request. People often are in the middle of booking things, and so they want to know whether they can take the time off, yes or no. And so whenever you get a request, we always recommend deal with that request promptly. And also make sure you deal with the request fairly. And so when someone is, for example, a working parent, or someone is requesting leave for religious events not covered by the already existing bank holidays, then of course you want to make sure that we can comply and give that time off where possible because of those additional requirements for their leave. You're not obligated to give time off for those reasons, but it's certainly something I always think you should take into account when someone makes a request and they give a reason for either religious events or being working parents. Again, you have to be quite careful as well, because if you get conflicting requests and one is for non-religious reasons, one is for religious reasons, you need to be careful of discrimination there as well, that you don't do the wrong thing. But if you get them in isolated kind of requests, I always think try to accommodate where possible. Now, you can refuse requests if reasonable to do so. So if you believe that someone cannot take that time off because maybe already there are too many people off within that period, or it's a busy time and therefore you need that person to be really present within the office, then of course you can refuse someone's request. And when you do refuse that request, we always recommend you explain the reasons behind it. Why have you refused someone's request? So at least they can understand why they cannot take that time off. And perhaps even offer some alternatives, maybe the week after or the week before. Maybe you can find some way around that, but always have a discussion with your employees if you are going to refuse someone's requests. Now, always be open to last minute requests. And again, I always recommend that employees are kind of ready for that. Like, what would you do if someone needs time off all to the last minute? It doesn't happen very often, but for example, if someone all of a sudden needs time off because their children, the school's closed, an emergency leave is not going to cover them for that period and they need to take time off, then, we need to be able to see if we can support an employee by giving them some time off using the annual leave. And so it's again thinking about how can we handle those last minute requests? Can we work with other people within the team to make that happen, just so that that person can take time off? Again, if it's not possible and it's reasonable to refuse it, of course you can refuse that request still. You can demand leave taken as well. So as an employee, you can tell people to take leave, take time off, but you need to give sufficient notice. A sufficient notice is twice the number of days taken off. So if you want someone to take a week off, you need to give them at least 2 weeks notice to ensure you give them the appropriate notice for them to take that time off. And employees cannot normally refuse that. Of course, they can protest, they can raise grievances if they want to, but you have a right as an employee to tell when the employees take time off. And it happens most often for the Christmas closures, for example, where organizations close between Christmas Eve and say New Year. And then as long as you give enough notice for that, people will take that time off as instructed. It might also happen if you come to the end of the leave year and you notice someone has not taken any of their leave or only a tiny amount of their leave. You might again want to enforce some leave on that person to ensure that they are taking leave as required by legislation. And I always recommend you use some kind of online self-service leave request system. Those manual systems where you might keep an Excel spreadsheet or use another system that might work within your kind of manual taking note of when someone takes leave and how much leave they've got left. It's prone to error because it takes one mistyping and the whole thing is off. Where if you have an online service system like Breathe, then people can book their time off themselves whenever they are. They've got mobile apps, they can go online and manage to get emails, they get reminders if they forget, and also it keeps track of their entitlement very, very neatly and correctly without much room for error. So I always recommend some kind of online self-service system if you can afford it, because it does have major benefits. It also allows employees to see exactly how much leave they've got left, so they can plan their leave much better in advance when it comes to that. Right, so that is requests, that is annual leave entitlement. Let's have a look how we can support working parents, because if you're like me, you have children off school right now, and they're going to be off for 6 weeks, which can create a real balancing struggle for millions of working parents in this country, because of course not everyone can take all that time off. And in fact, most people only take about 2, maybe 3 weeks off to cover that period. And so it's just thinking through, how can we as an employer support employees who have working parents? And so first thing I always say is try to encourage people to book leave in advance, right? Get into that habit, a bit of a culture where we say to people, look, make sure you book that leave in advance so you don't end up hitting that 6 weeks and not having any time off within that period. And when people do book time off for those 6 weeks, again, try to be empathetic, try to kind of be working towards accepting that request, because that's a time period they can go off on annual leave, because most other weeks within the year they are at school, and obviously parents cannot take kids out of school without good reason. So that 6 week period is quite important, and we need to try to make sure that people can take time off within that 6 weeks. Now, of course, if you have a lot of working parents, then they all probably want to have time off within that period. And again, this is why it's so important that we encourage employees to book time off in advance, so that if there are conflicting requests, we can deal with that in an appropriate way, and people can book their leave in a way where it doesn't conflict with one another. Now, where possible, allow for leave requested and be flexible and unusual requests. So that, for example, could be half days. I sometimes have done that where instead of taking 2 full weeks, I've taken 4 weeks of half days. And what that allows me to do is still spend time with the kids, but also still be able to do some work in the same time, which can be very helpful if I'm, for example, in a very busy kind of periods of work, but still want to spend time with the children as well as a parent. So always, again, look at ways of being a bit more flexible and creative in how people can have time, take time off when they are dealing with the summer holidays. Other things that you can support people with is offering flexible working options. So, for example, can we allow people to work in the mornings and evenings to free some time up in the afternoons so they can, again, spend time with those kids? Again, that can be very, very helpful, because often in the morning and the evening, our kids are in bed, so they're watching TV. And so it gives the employee more time, concentrated time, to actually focus on their work. Other things you could probably do is try to work out if you can allow for some home or hybrid working throughout a period, if not already allowed. Again, it's not that people can look after the kids while they are working from home, but of course it reduces travel time, and travel time can then be spent on with the kids and the family within the summer holidays. So again, allow home or hybrid working where you can, specifically around travel time savings, so people can be at home when they are done with work, rather than having to commute for another 30 minutes, 60 minutes, whatever commute they would normally have. So try to do that and try to be flexible, as I said, and where possible, try to encourage people to book that annual leave in advance. So if there's any conflicting request, we can deal with that to ensure people can take time off within that 6 week period. Heat waves. Now, obviously, we already had 3 heat waves so far. This year has been quite unusual, and there may be some more heat waves coming up. We don't know. But in the UK, every time there's a heat wave, we see loads of news articles and people going on LinkedIn and Facebook about how unbearable the workplace is. And there's no lie, of course. A lot of workplaces don't have air conditioning. People working from home, they don't tend to have air conditioning because we're not set up in this country to have air conditioning all the time. But believe it or not, there is no upper limit on temperature within the workplace. There's a minimum limit, 16 to 17 degrees. That's for kind of winters. We can make sure there's a comfortable temperature there, but there's no upper limits within the legislation, which means that employees cannot say, oh, it's too hot, I don't want to work anymore, because there is simply no legislation that allows for that. But what the legislation does say is you need to ensure that people are looked after when there is a heat wave. And that means making sure they're keeping temperature at a comfortable level and providing clean and fresh air. So if you work from an office environment or a workplace environment people have to go to, make sure there are windows that can be opened, doors that can be opened, allow fresh air to kind of go through the rooms. If you have fans, try to set up fans so that people can actually have a bit more cool air coming from there. Because you still need to ensure that people can work in a safe environment. The one thing we're trying to avoid here is heat stress. Heat stress, of course, is where people become very stressed out because of the heat, and so they can't think very rationally, they can't think very clearly. That can be a real danger to people, and so that often happens because people are either dehydrated or they don't have enough fresh, cool air, and so their body completely heats up and fails to cool itself down to the point where it becomes a medical emergency. So as employers, we need to make sure that doesn't happen within the workplace. And we need to do that by opening windows, doors, allow fans to blow out. And if you do have aircon, to switch that on. Again, if we can provide some support in addition to that. Of course, where possible, we can allow people to work from home. When people work from home, they can probably find a room that's coolest within their house and actually sit in there to ensure they can kind of work comfortably within their own home and their temperature within the home, and they can control that temperature much better themselves when they're at home as well. Flexible dress code can be actually helpful as well. Of course, there needs to be a limit. So we don't want people to come into kind of swimming shorts and bikinis, but we do want people to come maybe in a bit more looser clothing. Maybe we can allow for more shorts, just allow people to wear t-shirts, for example, rather than shirts. Thinking about how can we relax that dress code a little bit so people can be in more comfortable clothing where possible and allowed. Again, if people work in an office environment, provide fresh and cold water so people can actually hydrate themselves in the temperatures. That often means that if we don't have a water cooler already in place, maybe buy some kind of bottled water that we can put in a fridge, for example, but just making sure there's something available for them that they can cool down on and completely hydrate. Again, the one thing we want to avoid here is that heat stress. Also allow for more breaks. This sounds very weird, but if we can actually allow for 5-minute breaks every hour, for example, where people can quickly walk out of the room, outside, go in the shade, whatever they need to do, throw some water in their face. Again, that can be very helpful because it allows them to kind of cool down. You don't want to sit in a chair all day with a heat wave. And so allow people some kind of small breaks here and there to kind of cool down, as I said, take some water, throw some water in their face, go outside. That can be, again, very, very helpful. And again, think about flexible working during a heat wave. Mornings and evenings are often a lot cooler, especially the last heat wave. The morning was always very, very nice to work in. And so if you can allow people to work in the mornings, for example, so they can actually work in the cool air before the heat really starts to kind of kick off, again, that can be very, very helpful to those individuals. And then lastly, we have people being stuck abroad. Now, this happens every year, and there are hundreds and thousands of people who might get stuck abroad because of maybe flight delays, there may be flight cancellations, maybe there'll be strikes. It might be a natural something that occurs where flights were completely stopped for a period of time, as we probably remember from 2012 with the volcano in Iceland. So people do get stuck abroad, and there's always kind of a confusion about what that actually means in terms of their employment, pay, what we need to do as an employer, what we shouldn't be doing as an employer. And so I just want to kind of cover that to make sure that we are clear and also understand what we need to do in the event that someone is stuck abroad. I mean, the first thing we always want to make sure is that we are preparing ourselves for this. Like, have a bit of a playbook, understand what to do if someone calls in and says, look, my flight's been cancelled, I'm supposed to be back at work tomorrow, I can't make it, I'll probably be back in 2-3 days instead of tomorrow. Make sure you kind of prepare for that. What is kind of the emergency plan there? What can we do to overcome that gap that may have been created, especially where maybe other people are going to leave the following day and all of a sudden you've got a gap in service delivery, for example. So always be prepared, because there's definitely a reality that can happen to any organization with any employee who goes abroad. And so whenever we are getting a phone call or an email to say that they're stuck abroad, always try to seek contact with that employee. Try to get more details from them. How long is this delay for? When do you think you can be back? Do you have your equipment with you that you can access, maybe work remotely where that's possible? So again, we can start kind of understanding what some of the possibilities are, but also when they're going to be back, so we can plan much better to work out when they're back and how we're going to plug that gap in the meantime. Now, if you can provide support, then there are a few things, of course, available. One thing is allowing some additional leave. So maybe we can just extend that current annual leave request by a few days to cover that delay period. Allow for unpaid time off. So, just take some time off, but it won't be paid if that's what they want to do. Or allow them to work abroad. Now, there are limitations to allowing people to work abroad because, of course, there's some GDPR potential implications depending where they are. It may also be that the local legislation doesn't allow people to work from that country unless they have special visas. So you have to be kind of mindful whether they can work from abroad. But in the vast majority of cases, someone accessing their laptop for a few days just so they can do some work while in a hotel room waiting for their flight to be rescheduled is not going to cause major issues in the vast majority of cases. But it's just being mindful, of course, of some of the risks that might be involved, allowing people to work abroad while they're waiting for their flight to be rescheduled. Now, if an employee cannot work because of, for example, they're being stuck abroad, the default position is that there is no obligation to pay that employee. Okay, and so technically they are absent without authorized leave because they are no longer on annual leave, and therefore they cannot work for that reason that we don't have to pay them a salary. That's the default position. And that's always the big question that we get to asked is like, do we need to pay them because it's not their fault? The answer is no, you don't have to pay them. But if we can try to find a way where we can still pay them, maybe through additional annual leave or allow them to work, maybe even half days, so they still get some pay, of course, that can be then helpful to the employee. And of course, might be also helpful to you, especially if they can work remotely to ensure there's no gap in that service delivery. So that's how we can help people who are stuck abroad. As I said, the biggest thing is to allow for additional time off, which is the most common way of dealing with it. But if they have a laptop with them and they can work abroad and access your services remotely, that's usually a very good alternative if, of course, they're not frontline delivery staff. So that's how we can support staff who are stuck abroad. Now, we do offer 3-hour advice for people who are not a client of ours yet. So if you do have a question about annual leave, for example, or there's some situation that you're going through that you're not entirely sure how to handle, just contact us. You can get 1 hour free support from our consultants. No strings attached. If you don't want to continue after that, that's entirely up to you. We just want to offer that again as part of our social impact fund to support social sector employers with their people management. And again, just to remind you as well, you have access to free HR fact sheets, toolkits, and also any previous webinars and blogs that we've produced in the past. If you want to connect with us, these are kind of connect links. We're on LinkedIn, Facebook, X, and I believe also Blue Sky. And of course, we have an online website, as I pointed out. And that leads us to any kind of questions. Leanne, are there any questions, Leanne?
No, not yet.
We'll give it a minute. We'll see if there are any questions. If you don't have a question, we need to go. Just want to say thank you so much for joining us. This webinar will be published on our website as well, so you can revisit, or if you want someone else to have a look at it, of course, you can just point them towards that. Look at the Leanne. Any questions now?
No.
Fantastic. All right. Well, in that case, thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, keep an eye on our website. In September, we are launching a employment law update on the Employment Rights Bill. So there will be an email following this to kind of invite you to that session where we're going to go through the latest updates on the Employment Rights Bill, as we now have a roadmap on when things are going to be introduced as per the changes that are coming through that bill. So put in your diary, September. I don't know the exact date, Leanne. Do you know the exact date? 22nd?
Hold on, find out. I think it's the 25th of September.
25th of September. Yes,
Yeah.
it is. Yeah, so 25th of September, Employment Rights Bill update if you're interested. But as I said, we'll send you an email with the details so you can register for that webinar. In the meantime, thank you so much for joining us, and wish you all a good day.
Thank you.